The gym was silent except for the faint hum of the flickering fluorescent lights overhead, a sanctuary of steel and sweat where Elliot could escape the noise in his head. He stayed late again, long after the others had left, because the rhythm of lifting weights felt like the only thing grounding him in Maplewood, Ohio, a town that clung to him like damp clothes. Tonight, though, something felt different, a pulse in the air he couldn't name. Elliot dropped the dumbbell with a dull thud, his breath heavy. He was 24, wiry, with eyes that carried too many questions. Growing up in a place where everyone knew your name and your secrets felt like a curse when you were hiding who you were. He'd always known he was different, not just in the way he avoided the church picnics or the way he'd tense when his dad asked why he wasn't dating. It was deeper, a truth he'd buried under layers of denial, afraid of what it meant in a town where different was a dirty word. He glanced at the clock. 9:47 p.m. The gym should have been locked up by now, but Jasper, the new trainer, was still here. Jasper, with his easy grin and broad shoulders, had shown up in Maplewood 3 months ago, a stranger with a past no one could pin down. He was 27, maybe 28, with dark curls that fell into his eyes and a laugh that made Elliot's chest tighten in ways he didn't want to think about. Jasper had a way of looking at people, like he saw through them, not past them, and it unnerved Elliot as much as it drew him in. Elliot wiped his hands on his shorts and headed for the water fountain, the cool metal pressing against his lips as he drank. He heard footsteps behind him, steady and deliberate, and his pulse quickened. "You're here late," Jasper's voice came, low and warm, like he was sharing a secret. Elliot turned, catching Jasper leaning against a weight rack, his tank top clinging to his frame, sweat glistening on his skin. "Yeah," Elliot said, his voice tighter than he meant it to be. "Just needed to think." Jasper tilted his head, his eyes searching. "Gym's a good place for that. Clears the noise, right?" He stepped closer, and Elliot caught the faint scent of cedar and sweat. "But you've been here every night this week. Something on your mind?" Elliot's throat tightened. He wanted to laugh it off, to say something casual, but Jasper's gaze held him like a spotlight. "Just life," he managed, turning back to the fountain, hoping the cold water would steady him. It didn't. Jasper didn't push, but he didn't leave either. Instead, he grabbed a towel from the rack and tossed it to Elliot. "You're going to wear yourself out if you keep this up," he said, his tone light, but laced with something heavier. "Come on, let's do one last set together. I'll spot you." Elliot hesitated, his mind screaming to leave, to run from whatever this was. But his feet moved anyway, following Jasper to the bench press. The bar was loaded heavier than Elliot usually lifted, but Jasper's hands hovered close, steady and sure. "You got this," Jasper said, his voice a quiet anchor. Elliot pushed, his muscles straining, and for a moment, the world narrowed to the weight, the burn, and Jasper's presence beside him. When he racked the bar, Jasper's hand grazed his shoulder, a fleeting touch that sent a jolt through Elliot's core. "Not bad," Jasper said, grinning. "You're stronger than you look." Elliot's face burned, and he mumbled something incoherent, avoiding Jasper's eyes. He didn't trust himself to speak, not when his heart was hammering like it wanted to confess everything he'd spent years hiding. They moved through the set in silence, the clank of weights and their synchronized breaths filling the space. When they finished, Jasper didn't step back. Instead, he lingered, his gaze steady. "You don't talk much, do you?" he said, not accusing, just curious. Elliot shrugged, his hands fidgeting with the hem of his shirt. "Not much to say." Jasper's smile softened, but his eyes didn't waver. "I don't buy that. You've got a whole world in there." He tapped his own temple, then nodded toward Elliot. "You just don't let it out." Elliot's breath caught. No one had ever said anything like that to him. Not his parents, not his friends, not even himself. He wanted to argue, to deflect, but the words stuck. Jasper stepped closer, close enough that Elliot could see the faint scar above his eyebrow, the way his lashes curled. "You ever feel like you're carrying something too heavy?" Jasper asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Like if you set it down, it might break you. Elliot's chest ached. He nodded before he could stop himself, the motion small but raw. Jasper's hand lifted, then paused, like he was asking permission. When Elliot didn't move away, Jasper's fingers brushed his wrist, light but deliberate. "You don't have to carry it alone," Jasper said. The gym felt smaller, the air thicker. Elliot's mind raced. Part of him wanted to bolt, to bury this moment like he'd buried everything else. But another part, the part that had kept him awake at night, staring at the ceiling, wanted to stay, to see what happened if he didn't run. Jasper's eyes held his, steady and unguarded. "I'm locking up soon," he said, his voice softer now. "But stick around. Let me show you something." He turned, heading toward the back of the gym, where the old boxing ring sat and used. Elliot's heart pounded, but his feet followed, drawn by a pull he couldn't name. As Jasper reached the door and turned the lock with a quiet click, Elliot realized he wasn't just staying to think anymore. The click of the lock echoed in Elliot's ears, sharp and final, like a door slamming shut on the life he'd known. He stood frozen by the boxing ring, the worn canvas under the dim lights casting shadows that danced like ghosts. Jasper turned back to him, his expression unreadable but not unkind, and gestured toward a small storage room tucked behind the ring. "Come on," Jasper said, his voice steady but carrying an edge of something Elliot couldn't place. Excitement, maybe, or resolve. "It's not what you think." He pushed open the door, revealing a cramped space filled with old gym equipment, a battered punching bag, and a single folding chair. On the wall, tacked up haphazardly, were a few Polaroids and a faded flyer for a boxing match from years ago. Elliot's pulse hadn't slowed, and his mind churned with questions he didn't dare ask. Why had Jasper locked the door? Why was he here, alone with a man who made him feel like he was standing on the edge of a cliff? He crossed his arms, trying to anchor himself. "What's this about?" he asked, his voice rougher than he meant. Jasper didn't answer right away. He pulled the chair over and sat, leaning forward with his elbows on his knees. "Sit," he said, nodding to the floor. "Or don't. But hear me out." There was a weight to his words, like he was about to hand Elliot something fragile. Elliot stayed standing, his back against the wall, the cool plaster grounding him. "Okay," he said, cautious. "I'm listening." Jasper ran a hand through his curls, exhaling. "I've seen you, Elliot. Not just here lifting weights, pretending you're just working out. I see how you carry yourself, like you're afraid someone's going to figure you out." His eyes locked onto Elliot's, unflinching. "I know what that feels like." Elliot's stomach dropped. He wanted to deny it, to laugh and walk away, but his feet wouldn't move. Jasper's words were a mirror, reflecting the truth he'd spent years dodging. "You don't know me," he said, but the words lacked conviction. "I know enough," Jasper replied, his voice soft but firm. He stood, closing the distance between them, and pulled one of the Polaroids from the wall. It showed a younger Jasper, maybe 20, standing in a gym, not unlike this one, his arm around another guy with a shy smile. "This was me, back in Chicago," Jasper said, "before I figured out who I was, before I stopped hiding." Elliot stared at the photo, his throat tight. The guy next to Jasper looked happy, unguarded, the way Elliot never let himself be. "What happened to him?" he asked, barely audible. Jasper's jaw tightened, and for a moment, his confidence flickered. "He left. Couldn't handle it. Not me, not himself, not the world we were in." He set the photo down, his fingers lingering on it. "I stayed, kept fighting, not just in the ring." Elliot's heart pounded so loud he was sure Jasper could hear it. He wanted to ask what Jasper meant, but the pieces were falling into place too fast. The locked door, the late-night gym, the way Jasper's eyes seemed to see straight through him. It wasn't just chance. "Why are you telling me this?" he asked, his voice cracking. "Because I think you're fighting too," Jasper said. He stepped closer, close enough that Elliot could feel the warmth of his breath. "And I think you're tired of doing it alone." The air between them crackled, heavy with unspoken truths. Elliot's mind screamed to run, to protect the walls he'd built, but his body stayed rooted. Jasper's hand lifted again, this time resting lightly on Elliot's arm. The touch was electric, grounding, terrifying. "You don't have to say anything," Jasper said. "But you don't have to hide from me." Elliot's breath hitched. He'd spent so long hiding from his family, his friends, himself, that the idea of being seen felt like standing naked in a storm. But Jasper's gaze wasn't judgment. It was an invitation. "I don't know how to do this," Elliot whispered, the words spilling out before he could stop them. Jasper's smile was small, almost sad. "You don't have to know. You just have to start." He stepped back, giving Elliot space, and nodded toward the door. "I'll unlock it. You can leave if you want. Or you can stay, and we can talk. Really talk." Elliot's chest ached with the weight of the choice. Leaving was safe, familiar. Staying meant stepping into a world he'd only ever glimpsed in dreams he didn't dare admit to. He looked at Jasper, at the openness in his face, and felt something shift, a crack in the armor he'd worn for too long. "I'll stay," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Jasper's eyes softened, and for the first time, Elliot felt like he wasn't alone in the fight. The storage room felt smaller now, the walls closing in as Elliot's decision hung in the air. He sat on the floor, his back against the punching bag, while Jasper leaned against the opposite wall, giving him space but not breaking the connection. The silence wasn't uncomfortable, but it was heavy, like the moment before a storm breaks. "So," Jasper started, his voice gentle, "what's got you staying late at the gym every night? And don't say it's just a lift." His tone was teasing, but his eyes were serious, searching. Elliot pulled his knees to his chest, his fingers tracing the frayed edge of his sneakers. He never talked about this, not with anyone. The words felt like stones in his throat, but Jasper's presence made them feel lighter, like they might not crush him if he let them out. "It's everything," he said finally. "My family, this town, me." He swallowed hard. "I don't fit here. Never have." Jasper nodded, like he'd expected that. Maplewood's small. Small towns have a way of making you feel like you're under a microscope. He paused, then added, "Why don't you fit?" Elliot's heart stuttered. He knew what Jasper was asking, but saying it out loud felt like jumping off a cliff. He stared at the Polaroid on the wall, at the younger Jasper and the guy who'd left. "I'm not like everyone else," he said, his voice barely audible. "I think I'm—" He stopped, the word "gay" catching in his throat like a forbidden prayer. Jasper didn't push. He just waited, his presence steady, like he'd wait as long as it took. Finally, Elliot looked up, his eyes burning. "I've never said it," he admitted. "Not to anyone. Not even to myself." Jasper's expression softened, a mix of understanding and something deeper, something like pride. "That's a big step just thinking it," he said. "You don't have to say it until you're ready. But I'm here when you are." Elliot's chest tightened, not with fear this time, but with something warmer, something that felt like relief. He didn't know how to name it, but it was enough to keep him talking. "My daddy's old school. Thinks being a man means marrying a nice girl, working at the mill, going to church. If he knew." He broke off, shaking his head. "He'd never look at me the same." Jasper slid down the wall to sit across from him, their knees almost touching. "I get it," he said. "My dad was the same. Kicked me out when I was 19 after he found a letter I wrote to someone I cared about." He laughed, but it was bitter. "Took me years to realize his rejection wasn't my fault." Elliot's eyes widened. "How'd you keep going?" Jasper shrugged, but his eyes were distant. "I had to find people who saw me for me. Friends, mostly. A couple of guys who didn't run when things got real." He glanced at the Polaroid, then back at Elliot. "It's not easy, but it's worth it. You find your people, and suddenly the world's not so heavy." Elliot wanted to believe him, but Maplewood felt like a cage. The idea of finding people here seemed impossible. "What if there's no one?" he asked. "What if I'm stuck?" Jasper leaned forward, his voice low and fierce. "You're not stuck. You're here, right now, talking to me. That's not nothing." He reached out, his hand resting on Elliot's knee for a moment before pulling back. "You're already moving." The touch lingered, a spark that made Elliot's skin hum. He looked at Jasper, really looked at him, The scar above his eyebrow, the way his lips curved when he smiled, the quiet strength in his eyes. For the first time, Elliot let himself imagine what it would be like to not hide, to let someone in. It terrified him, but it also felt like freedom. They talked for hours, the gym fading into the background. Jasper shared stories of his life in Chicago, of nights spent in queer bars where he could be himself, of heartbreak and healing. Elliot listened, soaking it in, his own walls crumbling with every word. He told Jasper about his childhood, about the time he'd kissed a boy in 5th grade and spent the next decade convincing himself it was a mistake. Jasper didn't judge, didn't flinch. He just listened, and it was enough. As the clock ticked past midnight, Jasper stood, stretching. "We should probably get out of here before we get locked in for real," he said, grinning. But before he opened the door, he turned to Elliot. "You're not alone, okay? Not anymore." Elliot nodded, his throat too tight to speak. As they stepped back into the gym, the weight in his chest felt lighter, like he'd left something behind in that storage room. For the first time in years, he didn't feel like he was running. The next week passed in a blur, each day pulling Elliot back to the gym like a tide. He told himself it was routine, that he was just sticking to his workout schedule, but deep down, he knew it was Jasper. Their late-night talk had cracked something open in him, and now every glance, every casual brush of Jasper's hand as they passed a weight, felt like a question he wasn't ready to answer. Maplewood hadn't changed, same dusty streets, same whispers at the diner about who was dating who, but Elliot felt different. He caught himself watching Jasper during group classes, noticing the way he encouraged everyone, from the shy teens to the grizzled veterans. Jasper had a way of making people feel seen, and it made Elliot's chest ache with a mix of longing and fear. One evening, as the gym emptied out, Jasper called him over to the boxing ring. "Ever tried sparring?" he asked, tossing Elliot a pair of warm gloves. "It's a good way to let go of whatever's eating you." Elliot hesitated, his hands clumsy as he pulled on the gloves. "I'm not really a fighter," he said, but Jasper just grinned. "You don't have to be. It's not about hitting hard. It's about moving, feeling." Jasper stepped into the ring, his stance loose but confident. "Come on, I'll go easy." They circled each other, the ring creaking under their feet. Elliot's punches were tentative, awkward, but Jasper didn't laugh. He blocked, dodged, and threw light jabs, his eyes locked on Elliot's. "There you go," he said after Elliot landed a shaky hit. "Feel that. You're in it now." Elliot's breath came faster, not just from the effort, but from the intensity of Jasper's gaze. It was like the storage room all over again. Jasper seeing him, really seeing him, in a way that made Elliot feel alive and exposed. He swung too hard, stumbled, and Jasper caught him, their gloves tangling as they steadied each other. For a moment, they were close, their breaths mingling, the heat of the ring wrapping around them. Jasper's eyes flickered to Elliot's lips, and Elliot's heart stopped. He pulled back, his face burning. "Sorry," he muttered, stepping out of the ring. "I'm not good at this." Jasper followed, pulling off his gloves. "You're better than you think," he said, his voice soft. "You just gotta trust yourself." He paused, then added, "And maybe trust me." Elliot's throat tightened. Trust. It sounded so simple, but it felt like handing over his heart and hoping it wouldn't break. He wanted to say something, to tell Jasper how much that night in the storage room had meant, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, he nodded, his eyes on the floor. That night, as they locked up, Jasper walked him to his car. The air was crisp, the stars sharp against the Ohio sky. "You ever been to Columbus?" Jasper asked, leaning against Elliot's beat-up sedan. "There's a place there, a bar. It's different. You might like it." Elliot's stomach flipped. He knew what Jasper meant. A gay bar, a place where people like them didn't have to hide. The idea thrilled him as much as it terrified him. "Maybe," he said, his voice barely audible. "I don't know if I'm ready." Jasper's smile was gentle. "No rush. Just know the offer's there." He reached out, his hand brushing Elliot's arm. And this time, Elliot didn't pull away. The touch lingered, a promise of something more. and as Jasper walked away, Elliot felt the first stirrings of courage in his chest. The next day, Elliot's dad called him into the living room, his face stern. "You've been spending a lot of time at that gym," he said, his voice heavy with suspicion. "People are talking, Elliot, about you and that new trainer." Elliot's heart sank. He'd known this was coming, but it didn't make it easier. "It's just a gym, Dad," he said, but his voice shook. His dad's eyes narrowed. "Don't lie to me. I raised you better than that." The words cut deeper than Elliot expected, and as he left the house, his chest tight with shame, he wondered if Jasper's offer was a lifeline he couldn't afford to ignore. Elliot's world felt like it was splitting in two. At home, his dad's words echoed, sharp and accusing, while at the gym, Jasper's presence was a quiet promise of something better. He started avoiding his dad's calls, staying later at the gym, where the clank of weights and Jasper's easy laughter drowned out the noise of Maplewood's judgment. One night, Jasper invited him to stay after closing again. This time, there was no storage room, no locked doors, just the two of them sitting on the gym's front steps, sharing a thermos of coffee under the flickering streetlight. "You okay?" Jasper asked, his voice cutting through the quiet. "You've been quieter than usual." Elliot stared at the ground, the weight of his dad's words pressing down. "My dad thinks there's something going on. With us." He swallowed hard, his hands gripping the thermos. "He's not wrong, is he?" Jasper's eyes softened, but he didn't look away. "Depends on what you want to be going on," he said, his voice steady but laced with hope. "I'm not hiding who I am, Elliot, but I'm not going to push you into anything you're not ready for." Elliot's chest ached. He wanted to tell Jasper everything. How he'd spent years pretending, how every touch, every glance made him feel like he was waking up for the first time. But the fear was still there, a shadow that wouldn't let go. "What if I can't do this?" he asked. "What if I'm not brave enough?" Jasper leaned closer, his shoulder brushing Elliot's. "You're here, aren't you? That's brave. Braver than you think." He paused, then added, "I'm not going anywhere. You figure this out at your own pace." The words were a lifeline, and Elliot clung to them. They sat in silence, the night wrapping around them. And for the first time, Elliot let himself imagine a life where he didn't have to hide. It was fragile, but it was real. The next day, Jasper invited him to Columbus. "Just a day trip," he said, his grin infectious. "No pressure. Just you, me, and some city air." Elliot hesitated, but the thought of escaping Maplewood, even for a day, was too tempting to resist. Columbus was a revelation. The city buzzed with life. People who didn't stare, didn't whisper, didn't care. Jasper took him to a small cafe, then a bookstore with a rainbow flag in the window. Everywhere they went, Jasper was himself, open, unafraid, laughing, and Elliot felt the walls he'd built start to crumble. At the bar Jasper had mentioned, the music was loud, the lights low, and the crowd a mix of people who looked like they belonged. Elliot felt out of place, his hands shoved in his pockets, but Jasper stayed close, his presence grounding. "You okay?" Jasper asked, leaning in to be heard over the music. Elliot nodded, his heart racing. "Yeah, it's a lot, but it's good." He meant it. For the first time, he felt like he could breathe. They danced, awkward at first, then freer, Jasper's hand on his waist guiding him. When their eyes met, Elliot didn't look away. He let himself feel it, the pull, the connection, the possibility. As they left the bar, Jasper's hand brushed his, and this time, Elliot didn't pull away. He laced his fingers with Jasper's, tentative but sure, and the world didn't end. On the drive back to Maplewood, Elliot felt different, stronger, like he'd taken a step he couldn't take back. But as they pulled into town, the weight of reality settled back in. He wasn't just Elliot anymore. He was Elliot, who'd held hands with a man, who'd danced in a gay bar, who'd let himself want something he'd never dared to want before. Back in Maplewood, the high of Columbus faded fast. Elliot couldn't shake the feeling that eyes were on him, his dad's, his neighbors, the town's. He went to the gym, but his movements were mechanical, his mind stuck on the memory of Jasper's hand in his. It had felt so right, so real, but now it felt like a dream he couldn't afford to keep. Jasper noticed, during a quiet moment, as they cleaned the equipment, he nudged Elliot's shoulder. "You're thinking too hard again," he said, his voice light but concerned. "Talk to me." Elliot hesitated, then blurted, "What if this doesn't work? What if I can't be this person?" His voice cracked, and he hated how small he sounded. Jasper set down the spray bottle, his expression serious. "You're already that person, Elliot. You're just figuring out how to let him out." He stepped closer, his voice low. "And I'm here. I'm not asking you to have all the answers. I'm just asking you to try." Elliot wanted to believe him, but the fear was a knot in his chest. That night, he went home to find his dad waiting, his face like stone. "I heard you were in Columbus," he said, his voice cold. "With that trainer. People saw you." Elliot's stomach dropped. "It was just a trip," he lied, but his dad's eyes bored into him. "Don't," his dad said. "Don't lie to me. I know what's going on." He stood, his voice rising. "You think you can just live like that? In this town? You're my son, Elliot. Act like it." The words hit like a punch, and Elliot felt the walls closing in again. He left the house, his hands shaking, and drove to the gym. It was closed, but Jasper's car was still in the lot. Elliot knocked, and Jasper opened the door, his face softening when he saw Elliot's expression. "Elliot, what's wrong?" Jasper asked, pulling him inside. The story spilled out, his dad's anger, the town's whispers, the fear that he'd lose everything if he chose this path. Jasper listened, his hand resting on Elliot's shoulder, steady and warm. When Elliot finished, Jasper pulled him into a hug, fierce and unyielding. "You're not alone," he said. "I've got you." Elliot clung to him, the tears he'd held back for years finally breaking free. In Jasper's arms, he felt safe, like the world couldn't touch him. When they pulled back, Jasper's eyes were bright with something Elliot hadn't dared name before: love. "I'm scared," Elliot admitted, his voice raw. "I know," Jasper said, "but you're not just scared. You're brave, too. Braver than you know." They kissed then, tentative at first, then deeper, the gym fading away until it was just them. It wasn't just a kiss. It was a promise, a step into a world Elliot had only ever dreamed of. When they pulled apart, Elliot's heart was racing, but it wasn't fear this time. It was hope. The weeks that followed were a tightrope. Elliot and Jasper grew closer, stealing moments in the gym, in Jasper's car, in the quiet corners of Maplewood where no one watched. But the town wasn't blind. Whispers turned to stares, and Elliot's dad stopped speaking to him altogether. The silence was worse than the arguments, a cold reminder of what he stood to lose. One night, at a town fair, it all came to a head. Elliot and Jasper had gone together, keeping their distance, but sharing glances that felt like secrets. Under the bright lights of the Ferris wheel, Jasper reached for his hand, and for a moment, Elliot let him. But then he saw his dad across the crowd, his face dark with anger, and he pulled away. That night, his dad confronted him at home. "You're throwing your life away," he said, his voice shaking. "For what?" "For him." The words cut, but Elliot stood taller than he ever had. "I'm not throwing anything away," he said, his voice steady. "I'm finally living." He walked out, his heart pounding, and drove to Jasper's apartment. Jasper was there, waiting, his arms open. They talked until dawn, about love, about fear, about the future. "You don't have to stay in Maplewood," Jasper said. "There's a whole world out there. We could find it together." Elliot thought of Columbus, of the bar, of the way he'd felt free for the first time. He thought of Jasper, who'd seen him when no one else had. "Okay," he said, his voice firm. "Let's do it." They left Maplewood a month later, their belongings packed into Jasper's car. The road stretched out before them, endless and uncertain, but Elliot wasn't afraid anymore. He'd found his people, Jasper, and the person he was becoming. As they drove toward a new city, a new life, Elliot reached for Jasper's hand, and this time, he didn't let go. The gym had been his refuge, a place to think, to hide. But it had also been where he'd found himself, where Jasper had locked the doors and shown him something worth fighting for. A life where he could be whole, loved, and free.